Let's start episode number 235 on the 17th of July 2020. What all do we have for you in store tonight? We start with singing of the song Peace Sign by Jonathan Young on a special request by Mr. Archit Sharma. Then we move on to the reading from the book P.G. Wodehouse, and then the final would be discussing the extreme rules under which sports functions today, and that if you have a breach of protocol as a player, then what is the result of the same. And also we will be discussing the information overload that exists tonight, that exists currently in the print, electronic, and pseudo media about this situation. So let's begin. Oh, whoa, oh, 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 whoa, oh, 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 whoa, oh, oh, oh. Well, it's strange. My head is remembering how the airplane flying overhead looks so effortless, but I cannot guess why it lingers in my mind. Evening after this, I'm a crying mess, and to be stronger now, my only wish, so I can finally have the bravery, so I can reach up onto the sky. Cruel fate engraving its carved onto the stone, hoping it reveals itself to me, and then I will know just where to go. This moment, I know I can breathe, hanging on a feeling, believe my only meaning. I hear a voice calling, telling me to risk it, asking if I've been going the distance, singing with the passion that I cannot deny. Eyes are swollen with the tears that I've been crying, but to the rest of the world ever smiling, singing for the courage that I am dying to show. With my peace sign up when I say goodbye, write a story of a hero. I didn't want to say I protected you and you were never weak. I am number two. You were stronger than I have ever been. You mean more to me than you know. I've changed myself since the day I yelled, and how about you go on by yourself? So if you have to laugh, I should tell you that I'm afraid that I am all alone. I'm kicking, I'm biting, impossible to breathe, going down below the depths of my troubled head, and I can feel my stomach heave. I see it, I need it. It calms the blood that beats. If only I could touch it enough that it's mine for keeping. Hear a voice calling, telling me to risk it, asking if I've been going the distance, singing with the passion that I cannot deny. My eyes are swollen with the tears I've been crying, but to the rest of the world ever smiling. Singing for the courage that I am dying to show, with my peace sign up when I say goodbye, write a story of a hero. These days, getting rowdy, getting bloody, I was all scraped, getting worn, and getting dirty. Now I hear you talking, and it is all coming back. I see it in my mind, my memory is revived. I could apologize for sleeping in it careless, and with every passing night, I wish that I was leaving it, and I'll swear that I'll be back again. Oh, whoa, oh, 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 whoa, oh, 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 whoa, oh, oh, whoa, oh. I hear a voice calling, telling me to risk it, asking if I have been going the distance, singing with the passion that I cannot deny. My eyes are swollen with the tears that I've been crying, but the rest of the world ever smiling, singing for the courage that I am dying to show. With my peace sign up when I say goodbye, write the story of a hero. With my peace sign up when I say goodbye, write a story of a hero. So this ends the singing of the song Peace Sign by Jonathan Young. I hope you all enjoyed it. Now let's move on to the favorite part of this episode, the reading from the book P.G. Wodehouse Ants Omnibus. It was still creeping with undiminished gusto as I steered the sports model along the road to Tortellay in the world that afternoon. I was convinced, of course, that Jeeves would never dream of severing relations with the old firm, and when urged to do so by this blighted Bassett, would stop his ears like the deaf adder, which, as you probably know, made a point of refusing to hear the voice of the charm he never so wisely. So, until this point, our protagonist is fearing to go into Tortoletas, a place that he detests. He talks about the strange relationships he has with the many members of that place, about how his aunt has told him that Jeeves could be snatched from him, an individual on whom our protagonist Bertram Wooster relies a lot. Now let's see what our protagonist does at the Tortole Tars. He had made goodish going on the road, and it wasn't more than 4:40 when I rang the front door bell. Jeeves took the car to the stables, and the butler, Butterfield was his name, I remember, led me to the drawing room. Mr. Wooster, he said, losing me in. I was not surprised to find tea in progress, for I had heard the clinking of cups. Madeline Bassett was at the controls, and she extended a drooping hand to me. Bertie, how nice to see you. I can well imagine that a casual observer, if I had confided to him my qualms at the idea of being married to this girl, would have raised his eyebrows and been at a loss to understand, for she was undeniably an eyeful, being slim, svelte, and bountifully equipped with golden hair and all the fixings. But where the casual observer would have been making his bloomer was in overlooking that squashy supiness of hers, that subtle air she had of being on the point of talking baby talk. She was the sort of girl who puts her hands over her husband's eyes as he is crawling into breakfast with a morning head and says, "Guess who?" I once stayed at the residence of a newly married pal of mine, and his bride had carved in large letters over the fireplace in the drawing room, where it was impossible to miss it, the legend, "Two lovers built this nest," and I can still recall the look of dumb anguish in the other half of the sketch's eyes every time he came in and saw it. Whether Madeline Bassett, on entering the marital state, would go on to such an awful exercise, one could not say, but it seemed most probable, and I resolved that when I started trying to reconcile her and Gussie, I would not scamp my work but would give it everything I had. "You know Mr. Pinker," she said, and I perceived that Stinker was present. He was safely wedged in a chair and hadn't, as far as I could see, upset anything yet, but he gave me the impression of a man who was crouching for the spring and would begin to operate shortly. There was a gate-leg table laden with muffins and cucumber sandwiches which I foresaw would attract him like a magnet. On seeing me, he started visibly, dropping a plate with half a muffin on it, and his eyes had widened. I knew what he was thinking, of course. He supposed that my presence must be due to a change of heart. "Rejoice with me, for I have found the sheep which was lost," he was no doubt murmuring to himself. I mourned in spirit a bit for the poor fish, knowing what a nasty shock he had coming to him when he got onto it, that nothing was going to induce me to undertake whatever the foul commission might be that Stiffy had earmarked for me. On that point, I was resolved to be firm, no matter what spiritual agonies he and she suffered in the process. I had long since learned that the secret of a happy and successful life was to steer clear of any project masterminded by that young scourge of the species. The conversation that followed was what you'd call, I have forgotten the word, but it begins with a D. I mean with Stinker within earshot Madeline, and I couldn't get down to brass tacks, so we just chewed the fat. Desultory, that's the word I wanted. We just chewed the fat in a desultory way. Stinker said he was there to talk over the forthcoming school treat with Sir Watkin, and I said, "Oh, is there a school treat coming up?" And Madeline said it was taking place the day after tomorrow, and owing to the illness of the vicar, Mr. Pinker would be in sole charge, and Stinker winced a bit, as if he didn't like the prospect much. Madeline asked if I had a nice drive down, and I said, "Oh, splendid." Stinker said Stiffy would be so pleased I had come, and I smiled one of my subtle smiles. And then Butterfield came in and said Sir Watkin could see Mr. Pinker now, and Stinker oozed off. And the moment the door had closed behind curate and butler, Madeline clasped her hands, gave me one of those squashy looks, and said, "Oh, Bertie, you should have not come here. I had not the heart to deny your pathetic request. I knew how much you yearned to see me again, however briefly, however hopelessly. But was it wise? Is it not merely twisting the knife in the wound? Will it not simply cause you needless pain to be near me, knowing we can never be more than just good friends? It is useless, Bertie. You must not hope I love Augustus." Her words, as you may well imagine, were music to my ear. She wouldn't, I felt, have come with anything as definite as this if there hadn't been a serious spot of trouble between her and Gussie. Obviously, that crack of his about her making him sick had been a mere passing, what you call it, the result of some momentary attack of the quip caused possibly by her saying he smoked too much or something of the sort. Anyway, whatever it was that had rifted the lute was now plainly forgotten and forgiven, and I was saying to myself that the way things looked, I ought to be able to duck out of here immediately after breakfast tomorrow, when I noticed that look of pain had spread over her map and that the eyes were dewy. "It makes me so sad to think of your hopeless love, Bertie," she said, adding something which I didn't catch about moths and stars. "Life is so tragic, so cruel. But what can I do?" "Not a thing," I said heartily. "Just carry on regardless." "But it breaks my heart." And with these words, she burst into what are sometimes called uncontrollable sobs. She sank into a chair, covering her face with her hands, and it seemed to me that the civil thing to do was to pat her head. This project I now carried out, and I can see, looking back, that it was a mistake. I remember Monty Botkin of the Drones, who once patted a weeping female on the head, unaware that his betrothed was standing in his immediate rear, drinking the whole thing in, telling me that the catch in this head patting routine is that unless you exercise the greatest care, you forget to take your hand off. You just stand there resting it on the subject's bean, and this is apt to cause spectators to purse their lips. Monty fell into this error, and so did I. And the lip pursing was attended to by Spood, who chanced to enter at this moment. Seeing the Popsy bathed in tears, he quivered from stem to stem. Madeline, he yipped, what's the matter? It is nothing, Roderick, nothing, she replied chokingly. She buzzed off, no doubt to bathe her eyes, and Spood pivoted round and gave me a penetrating look. He had grown a bit, I noticed, since I had last seen him, being now about 9 foot 7. In speaking of him to Emerald Stoker, I had, if you remember, compared him to a gorilla, and what I had in mind had been the ordinary run of the mill gorilla, not the large economy size. What he was looking like now was King Kong. His fists were clenched, his eyes glittered, and the dullest observer could have divined that it was in no sunny spirit that he was regarding Bertram. This ends part 2 of the episode. Stay tuned for part 3. The second match of the England West Indies tournament has started, and this time the roles are reversed. If in the first match England had won the toss, decided to bat first, and the decision backfired almost immediately, here West Indies, high on the confidence of beating England on the back of their bowling performances, especially led by the likes of Shannon Gabriel and the captain all-rounder Jason Holder, the West Indies decided to take the gamble of bowling first. But this time the England team was much better prepared. Premise of the majority of the commentators was that West Indies did not begin bowling accurately. They sprayed the ball. There were a lot of wides and no balls and extra runs given, especially by a certain Shannon Gabriel, who was struggling because of all the breaks that had been enforced upon the players. Despite all the practice that had come from playing the last match, few of the players were still rusty. There was what one calls the ring rust. If you look at the England team, they are in extremes. If in the 20 over and the 50 over version, they go at 7 to 8 runs per over, scoring over 400 runs in 50 overs regularly. They have been doing that. They nearly scored 500, and that was the fear which had emanated last year in the World Cup, but those fears were put to bed. The extreme version of the so-called the 5-day match, the England team goes into a shell. They go at 2 runs per over. Once again, the match started 90 minutes late due to rain, but the match went on till 7:30 p.m. local time. I am repeating again, 7:30 p.m. local time. Only country which will stretch the game because of rain and other external conditions which are not in one's control till 7:30 p.m. local time. It doesn't happen in Australia. In Australia, it goes on till 5:30 p.m. local time. In South Africa, in West Indies, it maximum goes on till 5 or 5:30 p.m. local time. In the subcontinent, especially India and Bangladesh, it goes on till 4:30 p.m. or 4:45 p.m. local time maximum, despite rain and all such mitigating factors. In Sri Lanka, it could go on till 5:45, but that's also a rarity. if this match was happening in India and there had been a 90-minute late start, despite all the making up the match has to make in the next couple of days, they would have not started the match, they would have called off the match. I'm telling you, in India, it would be a rarity that after rain, that is over 90 minutes of torrential downpour, countries like India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, subcontinent, the match would never start. Even if it did, the same umpires who are flexible about the timings, that they stretch the match till 7:30 p.m. local time, taking into account all the rules that allow the match to go till there. Unlike the first match where the first day ended with only 17 overs and the fear was that there would be a draw. That's not the concern in this match. Around 83 overs were bowled, means despite all the rain, they were able to bowl a good number of overs despite playing under cloudy conditions with no or little sun and playing under floodlights, which in my case calls for colored clothing. We can debate that later. So, how did the match go? Well, first let's discuss what happened before the match began. Something very strange happened before the match began. Jofra Archer, one of the top bowlers England has, and also like Kevin Peterson, Andrew Strauss, Ben Stokes, could call him another export from another country, giving him the fast visa and the naturalization process. Then he's been here for a long time, so you already know enough about Jofra Archer. But Archer was dropped from the team. Was he involved in match fixing? No. Was he involved in abusing another player? No. Match fixing and abusing another player are also breaches of code of conduct. Here there was a breach of code of conduct, but what was it? Just hold on, I'm coming to it. As I said, was it match fixing? Nada. Was it ball tampering? No. Was it abusing a fellow player? No. It was breaking the biosecurity protocols. Yes, another extensive code of conduct has been added to the armory of multitude of code of conducts which the players, match officials, broadcasters have to adhere to. Remember, this tournament only started on the condition that every stakeholder, passive, active, would adhere to the rules of conduct as postulated by the two boards, that is the West Indies Cricket Association and the England Cricket Association, along with the generic rules set by the International Cricket Association or the International Cricket Council. And unfortunately, Archer kind of breached those protocols. In short, those who have been in hostel, my listener, those who have been a part of the hostel environment, you remember that if you breach protocol, you are in trouble with the warden. Similarly, Archer is in trouble with his coach, captain, the chairperson of the England Cricket Board, the stakeholders involved in the entire match. Let's look at how it exactly panned out. England pacer Jofra Archer was on Thursday dropped from the second test against the West Indies for breaking the team's biosecure protocol and will now undergo two COVID-19 tests during a 5-day isolation period. The England Cricket Board officials said Jofra Archer has been excluded from the Raise the Bat second test against the West Indies, which started on 16 July at the Old Trafford following a breach of team's biosecure protocols. Archer will now commence 5 days of isolation and will undergo two tests in this period which have to test negative before his self-isolation period is lifted. How did this exactly happen? Let's take a look at this. On Monday, England players took the 370-kilometer journey from Southampton to Manchester in separate cars. Key word here being separate cars, so no team buses. They were not allowed breaks except halting only once at the ECB approved biosecure ground for lunch and at pre-approved gas stations. Does it deserve this suspension? Well, for me, it's a grey area because, as I said, this series sets the template for future series. So, the cricket boards have to be strict about players who break the protocol. Means there cannot be letting go of anyone on first offense. As I said, it is indeed a very strange situation. What I find most ironical is that after a player breaks some kind of rule, whether it is match fixing, abusing a player, or ball tampering, or a new thing added that is breaking the biosecurity protocols, then they apologize. They apologize after the fact. The fast bowler apologized for the lapse. I am extremely sorry for what I have done. I have put not only myself but the whole team and management in danger. I fully accept the consequences of my actions and I want to sincerely apologize to everyone in the biosecure bubble. As I said, it's difficult to analyze this. What Archer did was wrong in context of the situation so far, what has been happening. If you look at it from another angle, I do not see any reason why an individual should be fined or suspended. Maybe it's about showing the path. As I said, this tournament is a template, so they cannot let others be in danger because he broke the bubble. He pricked that bubble they were secure in. As I said, this is a unique situation, a situation which could give anyone the creeps, the fear which individuals have in mind while they look at your fellow player or the fellow individual. We will know later on if dropping Archer or suspending Archer or quarantining Archer will make a difference as far as England's bowling is concerned, because now England has replaced Archer with quality all-rounders in Sam Curran, Chris Woakes and Stuart Broad. If England get to 400 runs, this match is done and dusted for the West Indies. The travel was how much? 370 kilometers. That's like in the Indian context traveling from Delhi to Chandigarh. Just curious to see if sports matches do begin in India, if all the stakeholders finally get the confidence to start the sports match after all the fears of this situation have subsided. How will players travel? Will they travel? Will all the matches take place at one venue? Matches taking place at one venue make sense for sports like football and hockey, but the whole idea about cricket is to play in different grounds, crowd or no crowd, because the whole idea of the pitch comes into play. Just imagine if the news spreads out that the Indian team is traveling in their separate cars. It will be chaotic if those fanatics line up on the ground to see them travel. It could be chaotic and it could be what they call a breaching of the bubble. It will be very complicated if they do start a match in India and then if they have to play in different grounds. Or one of the solution could be to play in the same states, 3 different cities. For example, play in Nagpur, play in Pune and play in Bombay. That way they don't have to travel out of the state. Will this happen or not? Nobody knows. As it has been left to the various states and state associations should decide that if their particular state can afford to start a sports event, whether it's just the practice session for the players or whether it is a full-fledged tournament. Will that happen or not? Well, let's wait for it. But now let's come back to the actual match. Enough about breaching protocols, because that is something which is once again, as I would call it, a grey area. England made 200 for 3 in around 80 overs with Sibley and Stokes at the crease. And when Sibley made around 80 runs of 250 balls, the newspaper called it old-fashioned cricket, grinding it out. Something we all were terribly missing in light of players who would score 100 of 120 balls. So Sibley reminded me of a left-handed Alistair Cook. How do I analyze the match? Well, when you score 200 for 3, even if you are going at 2.5 runs per over, means the match is still in the batting team's control. The bowling team will have to work harder to make sure that the batting team doesn't cross that 400 mark, because if England crosses 400, makes anything around 400, that is game, set, match and done for them. It would be very difficult for West Indies to come back. They would be, as one calls it, chasing the game. What happens exactly in the match, we'll see and we'll analyze as the time comes. Now let's move on to part B of part 3. And this part is very interesting. Yes, it's another grey area, but it's an equally interesting conversation. A few thin-skinned individuals would not like this conversation, but it's important. In an op-ed page published in the Times of India by an individual called Jag Suraiya, he has summarized this situation beautifully. What is that one word which summarizes this entire situation? It's information overload. This individual asked the question that, is something similar happening with the coronavirus pandemic? All the media, both mainstream and pseudo, are full of facts and figures regarding this, to the almost exclusion of anything else. How many new cases of the disease have been reported in the past 24 hours? How many have recovered? How many have died? What's the latest on the vaccine development front, apart from the frequently washing one's hands and wearing a mask? What other safety measures we must take to protect ourselves from the deadly pathogen? According to me, the conversation on this now is crossing that fatigue line. We are forcing ourselves to think that this situation is causing pessimism in individuals because they are staying at home. So they are not feeling good about things. Article further goes on to explain this situation as the advertising industry often uses the term information overload. Any ad in the press or any other media has an optimum retention value. People will remember and relate to the product being advertised given a certain variable number of exposures. Overexposure of any product through excessive publicity can cause people to mentally block out the message sought to be delivered. The clear and present danger of this virus and the threat it poses to us all is only too real and needs to be stressed. At the same time, there is the possibility that, bombarded by a blitzkrieg of do's and don'ts about the pathogen, our numbed senses become inured to the warnings. Before we dive further into this, let's discuss information overload in other contexts. What other context does information overload become a rhetoric? It's in the context of the internet. We say that there is so much information on the internet, that are we able to sieve out the information? That do we know what is correct, what is incorrect? that for every small thing we go on to the internet, onto the search engines to carry out our research. For example, by stressing on the biosecurity protocols again and again, after a while, nobody cares about it. Sports person, for example, just want to play the sports. As far as the shooting of TV shows and films go, the actors and other stakeholders just want to start the shooting. Yes, they have to adhere to some rules which may or may not be to their liking. For example, the rules in a TV show are that close contact of the performing artists, the actors cannot take place. They cannot have scenes in which there is a large gathering. Some TV shows, such scripts don't matter, but a majority of the TV shows hype on these large gatherings, on these events. Entire script revolves around having large gatherings, pandering to the mindset of people who enjoy watching fictional events such as weddings and other such things. And the popularity of a TV show rests on the gatherings, the 100 odd gatherings of people, as far as the shooting of a certain scene is concerned. For me, we are getting too much carried away by this entire situation. As you must have heard in my previous episodes, I said that this whole conversation around hand washing, being hygienic, and wearing mask and cuffing onto your sleeve or cuffing with a hand on your mouth is obvious. We don't need to be told this 1,000 times. People know about this. It's a natural reaction. Ironical, because on one hand we talk about skilling and reskilling, and then on the other hand we celebrate things like 98% marks obtained by students. Well, if 98% marks is the eventual target of a student in a school, then the entire idea of skill is a waste. As this article rightly postulated, there is an information overload. There is a fatigue of the same thing being repeated again and again. Let me tell you, this Archer situation will become into a debate and it will go on for months. The question that will rotate now is it safe to conduct a match? Can the players, the officials, the stakeholders be trusted to travel from one ground to the other without breaking protocols, without breaching the rules set by the various cricket and the sports associations? This debate will not end. Is it safe? Is it safe for other players? If one player breaks a protocol, will other players be tempted to do the same despite the so-called dangers associated with going outside the bubble? Should players be trusted to go in their private vehicles? Should there be some kind of monitoring system, a LoJack, where an individual, their coach or some official tracks each and every player's car as it travels, and if it diverts from the set route, will that player be warned once or twice that you are diverting from the route? This Archer situation is going to become a mountain out of a molehill. It will be discussed. There is no two facts about it. I make no bones about it when I say that this Archer situation will put other countries on alert. As far as the traveling of players from one ground to the other is concerned, and this is practically impossible in a country like Australia, because Australia, like US, has long borders. It's not possible to travel in a car or in any kind of road transport from one part of the country to the other. You cannot travel from Adelaide to Melbourne in a car. It will take 2 or 3 days. And then all the players had was just 2.5 days of rest, out of which a day and a half was spent in traveling. Humans love making mountains out of molehill. An archer will have a target on his back literally. Or will there from now be a standard set where there will be an escort for every vehicle? Indeed, it's going to be a very interesting situation as to how stakeholders, passive, active, the various sports department of other countries analyze this situation, because Archer, according to a few people, broke the rules of engagement, broke the rules of the very reason this tournament was conducted was to adhere to the rules. But then they were put in a situation where they had to travel nearly 200 miles, nearly 400 kilometers. That is stressful. If this could become an excuse for countries like India, Sri Lanka, and the subcontinent to come up with this reason that because this happened, if a player of Archer's pedigree can do it, feel homesick, then it can happen with our players also. If a player of an England team can't be trusted to follow a straight path who diverts from the route, then it's obvious that how do you trust giving cards in the hands of players in countries like Bangladesh, India, where the route on the road is not straightforward. The roads are not that smooth. You have to go through certain points in the route where there will be a crowd. If the news spreads tomorrow that Kohli, Rohit, etc. are traveling from Delhi to Bombay in a car, well, that's anyways a very long route, but they are traveling. And if the information spreads, well, whatever be the situation, pandemic or no pandemic, people will line up, and that will further delay their travel. What if they line up? What if they start following the car like fanatics usually do? Is it possible in India to go with this? I don't think so. If matches do begin in India and players have to travel from one city to another for the match, I think road transport is off the charts. Road transport is not practical. The only practical thing is either charter flights, where if you have a team of 24, you can have 6 players in 4 charter flights each. I'm sure the Indian Cricket Board, which is often dubbed as the cricket board with the most moolah, can afford this. But then the question is if the matches will ever start. Well, that's a different debate, because that's something every sport association will have to go through. It will not only be the biosecure protocols in that particular ground, because not all Indian stadiums have a hotel on site. They have to travel a few kilometers, even 1 kilometer of travel. If the news spreads that PV Sindhu is traveling from the ground to a hotel, they will mob her. You know what happens in India. They will mob her. Even if they try to do it quietly, the information spreads. You don't need any kind of digital media to spread. All you need is one message that goes and it spreads like wildfire. So yes, there is that tentativeness of conducting matches in Indian grounds. As the information overload spread, when you know that there is an overload on the electricity transformer, the transformer collapses. When there is an overload, when you open multiple tabs on your computer, the browser crashes. Similarly, when there is so much information about the situation, as this individual rightly pointed out, there will be a crash. People will get tired of it, and it's happening despite all the positive and the so-called negative consequences of what happens. So this ends a very interesting episode number 235 on the 17th of July 2020. Stay tuned for the next episode.
For more awesome content, tune in to the next episode of the Weekly Show with Aditya.